What's up? This is the best of Happy Hour. I am your host, Ryan Hoppy. And now on my show, I like to interview radio hosts to talk about their radio careers and everything they've been up to. And with the new format change at 97.9 The Loop in Chicago, that I'm going to post 3 individual interviews with people that worked at 97.9 The Loop that I have interviewed in the last 3 years I've been doing this show. The first one that came out is with Kevin Matthews, and that can be heard on my Hoppy Radio app. This second one is with the one and only Garry Meier, as he called into Happy Hour. And this next guest is a guy that I grew up listening to as my mom would pick me up from second grade and she would have him on in the afternoon. On the phone line is Chicago radio legend Garry Meier. He is on Happy Hour. What's up, man?
Well, I was 12 when your mother was driving you around, so we're about the same age.
Exactly. I think you actually were in my second grade class and I just don't remember.
I still feel like I'm in second grade.
How has everything been, man, this whole transition into the podcast world? You sound like you're having the time of your life, like you're in second grade.
Well, here's an analogy that I've been making lately. I don't know if you've ever watched the internet series with Jerry Seinfeld, Comedians in Cars Getting Coffee.
Yes.
And, okay, now let's preface this with, it's easy to say when he's got $1 billion in the bank, but when you watch him do that, he looks like he's having more fun doing that than he probably did doing the Seinfeld show. And I think it's because of the fact that you own what you're doing. It's whatever you want to do. It's your rhythm. And that's the way I feel about doing the podcast. It's the way I want to do it. It's a flowing situation that I didn't have on AM or FM. So all of those things are much different and I think better. And I just enjoy doing the show this way more than I ever thought I could.
Now, when you were doing radio in the past and the internet kept growing and growing, did you ever think there would be a thing like a podcast? Like when you were doing radio for years and years, did it ever seem like there would be a potential for it? Like, did you ever think it would happen?
Well, let me tell you this. 10 years ago, a friend of mine who is very technically savvy, he's way ahead of the curve. 10 years ago, he said to me, "Why are you still on AM and FM? It's over. Get off, da-da-da." And he told me to start doing this 10 years ago. Now, I have to admit my comfort zone was still being on AM and FM, and I was not ready to take that plunge. But then 2 years ago when things happened, I thought, now I want to take that step and start doing it this way. But I guess to your point, I couldn't tell 10 years ago how this was all going to play out. But now it's quite the force, and it's certainly challenging how people listen to what they listen to. So now it's real easy to wrap my brain around because it's all over the place.
Now, what I want to ask you is, how long have you known Howard? Because I had no idea, and I'm a big fan of your work, that you had a friendship with the king of all media. So how did that first begin?
It began when he announced he was going to satellite over 10 years ago now, and I had just left an AM station here in Chicago, and so I thought, well, what I had heard at that point was they were going to give him 3 channels, and he was going to build those channels. In addition to whatever he was going to do, he was going to put other people on those channels. So I thought, well, I'll send him my resume. I don't even know if he knows who I am, and I'll just send it like I'd send it to anybody else who might be hiring. And so I sent him some things, and one of the things I sent him, we were at that point both on the cover of a local music magazine here in Illinois, and we were on the front cover because of his transitioning to satellite and then me leaving my job. So they were doing some kind of comparison in that. So I sent him that issue, and he got that, and he looked at that, and then he got a hold of me very quickly. And then we met in New York and really hit it off because we have very parallel backgrounds as far as when we started and a lot of things that happened to us, although obviously he became the king of all media. And I'm basically I'm going to call myself the jester of all media. But that's how it started, and we've been in touch ever since. And I had him as my first guest when I started my podcast 6 months ago.
Now, has he given you any advice over the years when it comes to radio, or is this more of just a nice friendship that you've built with him?
Well, I don't know if that's something he'd want to do, although I know that he was kind of anti-podcast when it first started. But then he told me, he said, listen, let's be honest, there are thousands of podcasts out there. They're not all going to get traction. The fortunate thing with me is I've got a radio base that I started with, and I've transferred some of that audience to the podcast. And I think for me and other people that have had that happen where they started on radio many years ago and then they made the transition to the internet, they were at least able to take an audience that they'd already built up and transfer it. And I think that's where Howard decided, well, it might not work for a lot of people, but those of us who have been from that background might have a better go of it because we have a built-in audience that we can hopefully transfer.
Now, this is just from a nice, quote-unquote, millennial coming from the outside, because I wasn't here on this earth when you were on the radio back in the 70s and 80s and even the 90s. But what I can tell from Facebook and Twitter and just reading online is that the fans of Chicago radio were so passionate back in its heyday, and it seems like it's transitioning into your podcast. It might just be me, but I can definitely tell that people are really into what you're doing.
Well, thank you. I think it's just another way of what I've done for all these years, but it's a very deliberate way in that I do an hour a day, and it's the straight hour. It's not where, as you know, these radio formats, they're talk 6 minutes, stop, talk 6 minutes, stop. This has more fluidity to it, where if I interview a Howard Stern or an Adam Carolla, who I had on the show, I can talk for a full hour without any interruption, and that kind of interview lends itself to, I think, getting more of these people talking in a way that they talk in normal conversation, as opposed to, okay, let's stop there and pick it up after these commercials. And I think you get more out of it, and that was not doable on those other formats, but it is when you do a podcast. You can go as long as you want, and that's what I like about doing interviews with this format. It just flows.
Now, since there isn't ratings when it comes to podcasts, the way you can check is you can see, now for me, you can see where people are listening and how long they're listening and how many listens you get. And sometimes I feel like I check it way too often and it gets to my head. For you, are you able to see who's listening and who's signing up? Or do you take the approach of just doing your show every day and bringing the best to the table?
I think that's a yes or no question, Ryan. As far as that goes, let me go back to when I was on the radio. And, of course, everything kind of lives and dies by the ratings. But I thought if I get into that head trip, I'll be a wreck and I'll just auger into the ground, because I don't think you can pay attention to them that closely and expect to do good work. My attitude always was do good work and hopefully the ratings will follow. Because if you're going to follow every number and every report card, I just think you can't get off a certain mindset, and I refuse to do that. Same with the podcast. I don't even look at those numbers. I go in every day with the same attitude, the strength I want to go in with when I first started in radio, which was to win. And I think that will either propel me to where I want to go, or if it doesn't, well, I did the best work I can. To follow the numbers, it's not like some days I go in and go, well, I'll just kind of slough off on this one and I'll do better tomorrow. Every day, it's got to be over the fence. Otherwise, I don't feel like I should bother doing this. And that's the way I went into doing radio, and certainly the way I'm doing this podcast.
What is your key to finding the best prep for your podcast? Because I feel like when you're on the radio, there's prep services that often give you things to talk about, and then there's traffic and weather that helps fill up the time. For me, I'm having a hard time finding things to talk about during this election. So I want to ask you, as a longtime radio pro, how are you finding prep to talk about for an hour-long show each day?
Okay, I do almost no politics, believe it or not.
Yes.
I never really did do politics. I mean, I would talk about it if there was something that I could really play with, but not make people completely want to blow their brains out, because especially during this election cycle, it is so polarizing and so insane that I think people now at this point have completely tuned out. So I never really did that. I will, like I said, here and there I'll touch on it, but 99.9% of the time I don't even go near it. I have a producer that sends me a bunch of stories every day, and then I look at the internet and all these other sources, newspapers, whatnot, online, and then it's just my observation of what's going on in the world in general, and that's what I start doing every day, and I'll riff on that, and then I don't do weather and traffic because this technically is not a local show anymore. It's a worldwide show. So the weather and traffic in Chicago means nothing to somebody in Germany. And I do get a number of emails from Germany. So I stay away from all that, too. Now I have a woman on who does the news twice in the hour, but she looks for general news stories, and we riff on those stories after she does the newscast. But overall, it's my perspective on what's going on in the world, and then I'll add in these other oddball stories that I can play with, and that becomes the hour. And it is a lot different than doing 4 hours on AM and FM. 4 hours on AM and FM would be, to get an hour of content, would be doing 2 hours to get that 1 hour. This is, like I said, a pure hour where there's one commercial that I read, and then the rest is all me. So it's a different muscle that had to be exercised. But when I started doing it, I thought, wow, this is pretty interesting because I can just do the marathon for an hour, and that's it, as opposed to little sprints here and there.
How much prep and how much time did it take for you to get all of this going? Because for me, I work at 102.5 The Bone, and I'm honored that they let me use the rooms after hours. So basically, I just open up Adobe and I record. But for you to build up a podcast from the beginning, how long did it take for you to get everything going when it comes to the equipment and the website? How long was that whole process?
I think the nuts and bolts to set it up with the equipment and just to learn about it and to get the right equipment and just to kind of ease myself into it, that took a full year. And I don't say that anybody and everybody is going to need a year, but that's what it took me because I went about it in a very direct way and a very methodical way to make sure that my mind was getting into that the right way. And coming out of the box, you have to be firing on all cylinders right out of the box. The first show pretty much could be a life or death sentence for anybody doing these things because people will give you one shot, and if it was poor, they might not come back. So I had to come out, like I said, all guns blazing, and that's what I hope I did. And I spend several hours a day just putting that 1 hour together, and it has, like I said, the same energy that I had going in and doing that 4-hour radio show. It's just that kind of discipline that I've had all these years doing it, that I know what I want to do in general, and then I kind of mold it as I go along. Sometimes I'll take a left turn that I didn't anticipate. But the difference is I don't have any phone calls like I did on all those previous shows. And maybe someday I'll add that in. But right now, this is it. The straight hour is me, and it's been a great learning curve, even after doing radio all these years. It's a great new arena to play in, and I'm just loving everything about it. Could I ask you something?
What's up, Gary?
You work on The Bone?
It's 102.5 The Bone. It's like FM talk radio. It's very similar to what used to be on in Chicago with that format.
And what are the call letters where they can call it The Bone? B-O-N?
Well, what's weird is it's WHPT. It has nothing to do with The Bone.
How do they get the bone out of that?
I think it's a nice little play on words. It's kind of an edgy name to have. I have no idea, but we do really well in this market. Tampa Bay is very similar to Chicago when it comes to they care about their radio and they really get into debating about local radio DJs. You know what I mean?
Well, I vacation a lot of times I've been down in Tampa vacationing, and I love it down there. And we just like going down there. We like to go down there in the middle of summer when it's really hot because my wife and I like heat.
Yeah.
And we don't care that it's 95 and humid because in Chicago, for 6 months, it's bad sledding and 10 below. So whatever heat we can get, and it's less crowded. So we like that whole atmosphere. So, yeah, that whole section in Florida is really nice.
Now, Gary, I want to ask you this. What is your take on where the city of Chicago is going? Do you think it's going downhill, or do you think the media is making too much of what's going on in certain parts of town? What's your take?
I'll tell you what, depending on when you air this, the Cubs, as we are getting this on tape or with digital or whatever we get it on, the Cubs are playing Game 6. This is right before Game 6, so we don't know how this is all going to shake out. If the Cubs win the World Series and then they win it from behind like they would have to do in this case, I don't know what's going to happen to this city. The city has been afraid of this moment for many years, although they didn't have to really prepare because it didn't get to this point. it is at this point now. And again, this could be old news. We could sound like, what the hell are you guys talking about? But here's one point I want to make to your point, Ryan. This past weekend, when the Cubs played those 3 games at Wrigley Field, they lost 2, they won 1. That weekend, there were 16 murders, 40 other shootings. That number is, even for Chicago, is insane. It got very little coverage because the euphoria of the Cubs winning Game 5 really was all the news people wanted to talk about, and they figured we're going to have more shootings. Let's just put that aside for a few days and cover the Cubs, where we would have the focus on these shootings. That number is staggering, and it keeps going up. And I think we're really at a point here where if they can't figure out how to get a handle on this, things could get really bad in the coming months and years. Not that it isn't bad now, but this keeps going up and up. We've had more murders than New York and Los Angeles combined this year, which is frightening in itself, and that we're the 3rd largest city. I don't know what's going to happen. I know it's a lot of gang activity. Get this, Chicago has 150,000 gang members. That would be a semi-large city anywhere. And think of a semi-large city with just all gang members when you have 150,000. And that's what we're dealing with here. Now, it isn't everywhere, I know, but it is in areas that in the past they would not be in. There were never murders in certain areas, but there have been murders there too. But again, all large cities have this problem to a greater or lesser degree. Chicago, unfortunately, has become the poster child of that because during these presidential debates, Donald Trump mentioned Chicago several times, and I have to say he was pretty accurate in what he said there. And when Chicago and Aleppo are the only 2 cities mentioned in a debate, that is not a good thing.
Now, do you think there's any point of it where it might be Rahm Emanuel's fault? Because it's always easy to blame the leader. So I want to know, is there any part of him that should be blamed?
This has been going on way before Rahm Emanuel. It will go on after he's out of office. But a fish rots from the head back. He has to be responsible for some of this. But having said that, how do you police every neighborhood? This is going to happen to some extent. Every city has, like I said, this problem. How do you police every one of these neighborhoods? And you can't. But it's the gang problem. And the gang problem has been growing and growing for decades. I've made this suggestion, and I think a lot of people listen to me say this on my show, and they probably go, this guy's crazy. I said, all right, get the gangs together. They obviously have organizational skills. Give them a factory or 2 and have them make all their clothing and bling that people and the kids in the suburbs like to buy, and have them have an industry that they can gear their energy towards, and then they'll live past the age of 30 and not be a cancer in all these neighborhoods. So I at least have an idea. I don't hear any ideas beyond, we got to get more police on the streets. I don't think that's going to necessarily knock out all of the problems.
Now, what I want to ask you is, if we were to win the World Series, and we are doing this as the Game 6 will be played in an hour, so this could be listened to in a week, and people will be like, they won or they lost. But if they were to win, do you think the fans will behave in Wrigley Field, or will it be like craziness where there will be anger and there will be bad rioting?
Well, there are always people that will hijack an event like this and just create trouble. They will just go in under the umbrella of Cubs fans celebrating, and they're going to create trouble because they figure this is a great atmosphere to do whatever they want to do. What I do remember is when the Bulls won their first championship with Michael Jordan, I remember going to work that morning about 4 a.m, and there were windows broken all along our main shopping area here in Chicago, Michigan Avenue, and that was for the Bulls. And I'm thinking this with the Cubs has been pent up for 108 years, so you don't know how sideways it's going to come out. Again, if they win it, and as this airs, you're looking at the deal going, they did that. Anyway, if they win it, it will be because they came from 3 games down to 1. That way, in Cleveland, that way is even more exciting, I guess, for a Cubs fan because they were at that point down and out, and then they came back and won it. So that has a dimension to it. But winning it all after 108 years, this is going to be quite the celebration, I would think.
Is there any part of you that thinks they shouldn't win because it's the whole thing that they're the lovable losers, or do you think it's time for them to win? Because here I live in Tampa Bay, and everybody wants them to lose just because they would think it's funny. But me, as a diehard Cubs fan, I think enough is enough. This whole thing of being the lovable losers, it's run its course.
Wait, let me get this straight. So people in Tampa would get a kick out of it because it's been this long losing streak?
Yeah, people are like, come on, it's funny that you guys haven't won in over a century. I'm like, no, it's not. It's horrible.
Well, again, they were the best team in MLB this season. They get to the World Series. If they don't win, or as we air this, they didn't win, what do they have to do to win? This is getting to the point now where, I don't know if you believe in the curses or not, but there just seems to be, if they don't win, it just seems to be something is weird. And I don't know what that is anymore. Because on paper and on the field and everywhere else, they were the best-looking team. And how could they not pull it off this year?
And what's weird, too, is I'm hearing that this Cleveland team is down some of their best players, so you're literally going to lose, if they do, to a bunch of gritty guys that are journeymen in the MLB. I mean, I look at this team, and I have no idea who any of these players are besides Jason Kipnis, you know?
Mm-hmm. Well, again, Cleveland has had this drought, not as long as the Cubs, but they're in a drought, too. So they're hungry. And it is kind of interesting that it's a week before the election that we're playing Game 6, and you've got two teams in the middle of the country, Cleveland in a swing state, and a state that's pretty much up for grabs, in Chicago, the heart of the country. And it has all that American gravitas feel to me. And here it is, if you're not even a baseball fan, if you watched Game 5, the whole thing has a lot MLB must be going out of their minds, because this couldn't be any better. If it goes to Game 7, this is like winning the lottery for the MLB people, and for baseball purists. I think if you're a baseball purist, you got to be loving this, right?
Yeah, and I don't know if you saw the report, but this was the first time, maybe ever, or in a long time, that the World Series beat an NFL game. And to me, that's a sign that there's this decline with the NFL. Maybe I'm overreacting, but I think with all the controversy, with all the players off the field, and with Kaepernick, and just with all the new rules that are against the NFL, I feel like we're beginning to see the downfall of it. Am I overreacting?
NFL viewing is down 29%. And
yes.
I think a lot of it is to your point. I think, and I'm just a general observer here, I'm not a diehard sports fan, but correct me if I'm wrong, there seems to be a lot of mediocrity in the NFL right now.
Every primetime game this year has been a bore fest. I mean, it's been awful.
Yeah, so they're suffering because of a number of things, and then you've got, like I said, these two teams that haven't won in a long time, and it's the Cubs. I think living in Chicago, it's almost, and I'm not necessarily a diehard Cubs fan. I grew up a White Sox fan, but I'm not a real huge baseball fan at all. I don't really care. It's good for the city. That's the way I look at it. But I do wake up and I go, I'm sure a Cubs fan thinks this too. Am I in a dream? Am I going to wake up and this was all some weird dream? Because it doesn't seem real at this point.
It is very weird because it just seems like every time we had that chance to win, if it was 03, if it was 07 or 08, they were the best team in the MLB, and then they choke. And now it's like we just have to win 2 games and we win the World Series. It's just like a dream, Gary. It's like I don't even know how people would react if they were to win. You know, it's so surreal, you know?
And now I have to wake up and think that people in Tampa are laughing at us.
Dude, it's weird, man. People here in Tampa, they have this whole idea that Chicago is just murder, murder, murder. And it's really sad because Chicago has culture, it has great food, it has a great fan base. There's a lot of positives about the city. And I feel like with Trump saying the things that he says at debates and at rallies and with everything going on with the media, I think there's this negative outlook on the city within the past 5 years.
Well, again, whatever he said about Chicago, I have to say it was true. And I don't blame people in Tampa or anybody else that lives away from this city when you see what comes out of the city as far as these headlines. Those numbers are true. And while it's not everywhere in the city, it's obviously part of the city. So you're only as good as your weakest link, as they say. But here's the other thing. The city doesn't do anything to counterbalance that. They don't promote all the stuff you just mentioned. They just kind of sit here and take the punch, and that's what lingers. So when a presidential candidate says in a debate, you've got Chicago and all the killings and this and that, well, again, he's not making that up. That part is true, and the city has to figure out, a lot of this is sociological. It's not where the city can be blamed entirely, although I don't want to get into the whole social pattern that's been in Chicago for 50, 60 years. Here's what I will tell you, and don't judge me from any kind of Republican, Democrat standpoint. I'm going with what is. We have had a Democratic mayor in Chicago since 1931. And out of all those years, 86 years or so, there were 2 family members running the city for half of that. And here's my take. You can't have one group run things for a very long time and expect change, because what happens, they get in and they know where all of the bodies are buried. They know how to control all the exits. And that's what happens. Things get run a certain way and they don't change. And I think we need some change in certain areas to get people to think a different way. When you have one party running anything for that long, it seems like they're going to get very stagnant or very complacent and very in control. And I think that's kind of dangerous. And I think whatever happened there is beginning to roost more and more now in Chicago.
And this thought came to my head the other day. Can you imagine if Caprini Greenie, the bad projects, was around now with social media and everything going on? I mean, there's that classic old case from like 1992 of that kid that was like 7 years old that was crossing the block and got shot and killed. I mean, can you imagine if everything that went in those projects was here now, you know?
Yeah, Cabrini Green that you referenced there was this housing project that was notorious because it was the most dangerous and crime-infested housing project probably in the country. It's been torn down. But you can't warehouse people. You can't put, say, 15,000 people in a housing complex and expect things to turn out well. That's like putting a suburb in one building. I mean, think about it. And how do you think that's going to go? And that's what they did here. They warehoused these people, and then they didn't have jobs. And, of course, the gang would pick up these kids that had no future. And I can see where if you're 15 and you got no structure and no job prospects, and somebody comes along and says, we'll give you this amount of money to do this, hey, it's better than nothing. And it's easy to judge when you're not part of that and say, oh, it's all those people, their crime, da-da-da. But, again, when you get into the core of it, you can see how this stuff keeps on happening.
Now, there is so much negativity that comes out of Chicago and in the headlines, and we've talked about it on this podcast. What are some positives about the city that maybe people that live in Tampa or that are listening in different cities don't know about the Windy City?
Well, if I was going to make a commercial to promote Chicago, and this might not sell in Tampa because you have beaches, I would start. We have beaches in Chicago. Here is a major city that has these beautiful beaches on the lake. And the lake, I think a lot of people, when they hear lake, they think, oh, I can see across it. No, this is a large body of water that we're situated on. And that in itself is pretty magnificent. And there are a lot of other things, the architecture and, like you mentioned, the culture, the restaurants. There's a lot of stuff going on, but that doesn't get out as much as this other bunch of crap that we've been suffering under. So I would start with that and work from the beaches out. And I think you can counterbalance what the negativity is with that. And I don't know entirely of what goes on in Tampa. Do you have a crime there that's not talked about because it's Tampa and you get overshadowed because you got Chicago with all their crime? Or what's the worst thing that happens in Tampa?
To me, the worst thing that happens in Tampa is more the transplants that come here and just act weird. It seems like we have really weird crime down here, like people making meth or people having sex with their dogs in their backyard. There's not really murder per se. Like there's murder in Tampa and the bad parts of St. Pete, but it seems like it's more, there's this thing where since it's sunny all the time, it gives this weird vibe where people act up. So to me, it's more the whole thing of people being Floridians down here. It's just a really weird area. It's always people watching.
I got to be honest, about 20% of the wacko stories that I do are out of Florida.
Yeah, there's just something that happens, and it's always in there's this suburb called Pinellas Park right by Tampa Bay, and that's weird. Orlando's weird. Fort Myers is weird. That's where you get all the weird news headlines. I mean, whenever I'm looking for prep for the show and I see woman throws poop on ex-boyfriend's wall, I saw it and I went, Florida, and I was right. Whenever you see that really grimy, gross headlines, 99.9% of the time, it's Florida. It's weird.
Ryan, you have no state income tax. Aren't you happy about that?
I am very happy about that. I don't make a lot right now when it comes to radio, but when I do, that definitely will be a positive because I feel like this is a market that I want to be in for a while. But with radio, you can lose your job the next day. So who knows where I'll be next week, next year, in 5 years. You know what I mean? For me, I'm the guy where every day, if my key card scans and I'm able to open a door, I go, I'm in radio right now. That's how I view it.
Ryan, a lot of people with other jobs have that same feeling. It's not just broadcasting. A lot of people go to work and hope their key card still opens the door because the way things are going, who knows? I mean, it's just one of those strange eras that we're living in, and you've got all these jobs going overseas, or you hear about robotics doing more and more jobs, and on and on. We just had a story the other day where a Budweiser delivery truck, was driverless for 120 miles. They tested it out. There was a guy sitting there monitoring, but the truck drove itself for 120 miles from point A to point B.
What do you think about everything going on with the future of cars like Uber and Lyft? For me, as a young kid, when I go out drinking, it's great because I'm able to get home safe and it's like a $10 ride home. But you've seen taxis your whole life. Do you like Uber and the competition that it brings, or is there a part of you that's not a fan of it? What's your take?
I was in Los Angeles this past summer, and it was the first time we took Uber. We had always rented a car, but our friends out there said, why are you doing that? Take Uber, take Uber. They've been taking Uber for years. And we took Uber, and we had the best experience for 2 weeks. I will never rent another car out there. It was fantastic. It was fantastic because these drivers, they know all the back roads if there's traffic and this and that, and it's much cheaper than renting a car. And you don't have to park it, you don't have to pay for the gas, you don't have to pay for the parking at the hotel and all that. So I became a huge fan of Uber there. Now, in Chicago, I walk mostly or grab a cab. I haven't really gotten into Uber as much here, but I do say that the Los Angeles experience was magnificent.
And the thing, too, about it is I love when the media says this crazy thing happened in an Uber or this happened in an Uber. And it's like taxi cabs have been batshit crazy for years and nobody reported on that. To me, whenever somebody tries to report a negative thing that happens in an Uber, it's the media trying to bring it down. Because most of the time, 99.9% of the time, these Uber drivers are just trying to make money and they're trying to get you to your place safe.
Here's another example to your point. When a Tesla would catch on fire, which, 2 or 3 have, it becomes a big story, even though maybe thousands of other cars start on fire every year, but nobody cares because it's not as sexy as the Tesla. And that's the same thing. Nobody really cares about these other things because they don't make the mark a Tesla makes. So that gets all the attention because these are big players. But as far as car fires go, it's probably a small percentage, and it gets all the attention. But that's the way it goes.
Now, since we are on the topic about everything going on in the future when it comes to the mobile phones and Uber, what is your take on everything that's going on with social media? Do you think it's bad, or do you think there's a lot of positives that people don't look at? What is your take on everything that's going on?
Well, it's obviously a combination of good and bad. the good is, my God, can you believe on this one device you have access to all the stuff you have accesses to? And is access is a word? Did I say the right word?
Yes.
Yeah, that is a word. Okay, good. See, you're always learning. And that part of it, that conduit to the world is just mind-blowing. The stuff that obviously is a detraction is you've got very bad actors that can use it to do the damage they want to do, and they can do it very quickly. That's the downside. But the bullet is out of the gun, and we're not going back. So I don't know how this is all going to manifest itself. I wish I did have a time machine and could go 25 years in the future and tell you, oh, my God, you better start doing this now, back in 2016. But that can't happen, and we just got to ride this out and see where we go, because it's there. And we're not going back to electric typewriters and payphones.
Now, what would the world have been like when you were in radio in the 70s and 80s and 90s and even 10 years ago if everything that we have right now in social media was there? How would radio and everything have been different?
Here's what I think about, because I started in the 70s on radio, and I'm so glad that the internet wasn't around, because I probably did some really bad radio, and it would have been out there forever. So, and I may have some tapes of it, but I'd be the only one, and I'm not going to put it out there. But that's the good thing, because all of the training that I was doing is pretty much in the ether. When things really kicked in the late 70s, early 80s, the internet was still not there. So by the time the internet got around 20-some years ago, at least I was up and running. And whatever's cataloged is cataloged, and I don't have to worry about a lot of that ugly stuff from 25, 30 years ago and beyond being out there forever.
And you know what's weird, too, is just when you look at old websites, there's this website called archive.org. And a lot of times when I'm bored at night, because I'm a weird nerd, I like to see what websites looked like even 10 years ago. And it's crazy how there's just been this progress where websites look so much better than they did even in '06.
Oh, yeah. The way things are advancing, I read once where in the past it would take 25 years for a lot of change to happen. Now these changes are happening in increments of 5 years, and it'll probably even go quicker in the future. But it's happening faster and faster, and stuff that, as you said, looked like it was great 10 years ago now looks like an antique.
It's so weird, too, because a lot of times I like to watch, let's say, Michael Jordan highlights on YouTube or even Kobe Bryant highlights from 6 years ago. And it's crazy how when you watch the TV footage from, let's say, NBA on NBC or NBA on ABC from 7 years ago, it looks ancient. Even pictures from 8 years ago look ancient. And it wasn't that long ago. It's just because of HD. It makes everything look so much older.
Okay, how old are you?
I'm 23.
Oh, my God, I got shoes that are your age. So when you look at something from the 60s or 70s, you must think it's from 100 years ago, right?
I mean, it just looks so old. I mean, I go to this boxing gym, and all over the wall is like Mike Tyson. Like, they'll have pictures of him and pictures of the big marquee events framed. And I'm like, that must be from the 70s. And you look at it, and it's from 1999. I mean,
I know.
I have this outlook.
It's so fast that just staying and taking a breath for a moment on anything, and you're going to get run over. So you really have to run as fast as you can and stay ahead of this without looking like you're already in the ether as far as, oh, I did this 8 years ago. Isn't it great? No, it's 8 years ago. Forget about it.
It's really weird, too, how some people just don't want to get with the times and they're so negative about social media. It's like it's going to keep on growing, and you might as well embrace it, you know?
Well, again, how many of those people are out there? I know there are some people out there that still have flip phones, I guess. But I don't know how you can stay behind this curve and function. Or if you do, life is a lot harder, I would think. Whereas before you'd have to really do some legwork to get some information. Now you can go with a push of a button. Now 60% of Wikipedia is false, but still, there's something there.
Now, before I let you go, where do you want to see yourself within the next 5 years? Do you want to expand this podcast? Would you maybe want to be back on the radio? Would you want to be on, let's say, on Sirius XM radio? How do you want to see this play out when it comes to the Garry Meier Show?
I think a lot of this is going to be a hybrid of some sort. There's going to be transition where you've got guys on AM and FM, and they're transitioning into the Internet, and they're still using AM and FM to promote that leap, that transition. So you're going to see a lot of that, and that might be somewhere where I experiment. This is all so new that I'm not quite sure, and I'm looking at all these different things as they come along. So I'm not quite sure right now. This is great, and I'm enjoying every moment. But as you just said, I think you answered this in a weird way. Ryan, who the hell knows what's going to be in 5 years?
Yeah, I mean, what if radio just goes away completely and everyone hates it? Or what if it makes a great comeback? You never know. It's just bizarre to watch.
Well, here's my prediction, and this is not really even a prediction. This is happening. They say that the Internet will be available on your car dashboard within 5 years to push a button like you do AM and FM. And mentioning the Tesla again, the Internet is already available on the Tesla dashboard. Now, the Tesla is $100,000, but they're coming out with that more affordable model in the next year or so, and that will have it. But all these cars are coming with Internet capability one way or another. They already have Bluetooth and everything else. So I'm talking about as easy as you turn on the AM and FM radio in your car, it'll be like that to get the Internet within 5 years.
To me, that is where money will be made when it comes to podcasts, is once you are able to just get TuneIn Radio or get iHeartMedia right on your dashboard. To me, that's where podcasts will grow immensely.
That's the game changer.
Now, where can people find your work, since maybe they're not in Chicago and they heard this interview and now they want to check out the Garry Meier Show? What are some of the best ways to find your work?
Here's the easiest way, GarryMeier.com. GarryMeier.com. I got apps if you have an iPhone or Android device. Very simple. Just push a button there. I do 5 shows a week, Monday through Friday, and check it out. I have 2 under a paywall, but Monday, Wednesday, and Friday are free. And if you like those, maybe you'll sign up and go the 100% a week route. I'd appreciate that.
Well, Garry, thank you for coming on the show. I've been a fan of you for about 15 years now, so it's been an honor to have you on Happy Hour. Keep up the good work, Garry.
Thanks, Ryan.
This has been Happy Hour. I am your host, Ryan Hoppy, saying peace out.
Happy Hour. Happy Hour. Happy Hour is now over, but you can always listen 24/7 by getting the app or going to RyanHoppyRadio.com.